Good morning. We're so glad to see you here this morning, and we welcome you to our VACCRA meeting and those watching on live stream also. If you have not signed in the back of the room, please do so. We like to know our count. We have 1 hour. If at the end of that hour you have some burning questions that you have not had the opportunity to ask, we can stay a few minutes over time. That's okay. We're going to have one more meeting in June. Then we plan to take 2 months off. July and August, we will not have a membership meeting, but we'll be back ready to go in September. Our guest, Penny specifically, there you are. Penny would like very much to have a picture for the next newsletter. Chuck will take the picture of the back of your head. If you don't want the back of your head to appear in the next newsletter, we will give you time to arrange not to be in the picture. Anyone not want the back of their head in the picture? Take the picture, Chuck. We're good to go. Okay, thank you very, very much. As you know, we invited Kevin Salmon, who is the CFO of Pinnacle Living, to come to our meeting and discuss some financial questions that many of us have. Unfortunately, he could not come and he declined our invitation. Okay, is that all? I think that's all. I can turn the meeting over to Martha Cole, who will introduce our speaker, who will introduce our other guests.
A lot of introductions. Good morning. The Virginia Continuing Care Residents Association, VACCRA, is 20 years old. But it's really beginning to come into its own in the last few years. Through the leadership of former President Susan Hinderleiter, who is here, and our current President, whom we welcome today, Penny Jess. VACCRA was formed with goals shared by all of us to improve communication and establish mutually beneficial goals between residents of CCRCs and management. Penny received her doctorate in public policy and management. Then she spent her career in state management as the Consumer Affairs Specialist for the Virginia Office of Consumer Affairs. Penny is a major reason I believe in the need for VACCRA and its goals to make Cedarfield a better community. She told me she could introduce herself, and so I will introduce Penny to introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to your beautiful, beautiful home. I've lived in Richmond for 30 years, and I've never been here, so I'm grateful to be here today. Quick question. How many of you have endured a lengthy introduction of your accomplishments to the point where you are embarrassed to even sit there any longer? Well, one of my good friends was in the audience, and when they finished introducing me, and at that time I was shrinking smaller and smaller and smaller into my seat, and the host said, "Are there any questions before we begin the program?" And Rick raised his hand, and I thought, well, what's he got up his sleeve? And he stood up and he said, "You know, I thought you'd be taller." I couldn't believe it. So the moral of the story is never let your accomplishments precede your appearance. So in order to prevent any further jokes on my behalf, I brought my very two tallest companions today. Susan Hinderleiter, who is past president of VACCRA, who is taller by me of maybe 1.5 feet, and then Chuck Webb, who's even taller by her, you gotta stand, maybe by 2 feet, and so they are taller. So good morning, thank you. For those of you who get the VACCRA newsletter, my full pedigree is in, well, it's half of my pedigree, is in the page 2 of the spring newsletter. We've broken up our presentation into 3 parts. The 15 minutes of fame, as I call it. I'm supposed to talk for about 1 minute for VACCRA, who we are, what we do, and what we have to accomplish. And I thought to myself, well, you know, what do you need to know about us? And why did I particularly get here? And I thought to myself, we are the collective voice of more than 20,000 residents here in the state of Virginia. And how did I get here? Some time ago, when I got to Covenant Woods, I saw a quote. And how many of you are visual learners? How many of you learn better by seeing a picture? You know, you understand what I mean. How many of you are oral learners? You listen better. A couple of you. I'll get this printed out for you so you can see it. But this is where we are. And we talk about being in a bubble during the pandemic. When I arrived at Covenant Woods 7 years ago, 2014, this is what I realized. We were in a bubble. We have all entrusted our destiny to the young and relatively fragile industry we call continuous care retirement. This enormously complex national experiment, and it is an experiment, is in flux. We're a nursing home, we're a memory care unit, we're a hospital, we're independent living, we're assisted living. We have statutes and standards that are unresolved. They affect finance, care delivery, and governance from many different state and national regulations. The many opportunities we enjoy in our safe communal living are frequently matched by unresolved hazards of a burgeoning national franchise. Does anybody know how many CCRCs are in the country? Yeah, Chuck does. 3,000. 3,000. Who speaks for them? Does anybody know how many state associations there are out of the 50 states? 11. Should there be 50 state associations? Yes. So those other folks are on their own. Who helps them? Virginia Continuing Care Residents Association has been in existence for 20 years. We speak for you. You authorize us to speak for you. There's a whole wave of baby boomers right now who are rolling up their sleeves to work on your behalf. And that's why you are members. And that's why you are our best member community this year. And we thank you for that. So I am so envious of the work you are doing with your monthly meetings, offering the relevant information that members and new residents need to know, since they have invested their dollars in the lifetimes they're going to be spending here. So we'll make that a copy for Martha and Sally and Charlotte and Barbara. Who else am I missing? To provide for you in your next newsletter. What else do I have to tell you? Where did I come from? I have 15 years as a college professor in English and journalism. I got a fellowship from VCU, thank goodness, in middle age, And I spent my middle-age years, working towards a PhD in public policy and management. During that time, I was also working on my dissertation. I learned from Madeleine Albright. How many of you know her? God bless her. We need her. We need more like her. How to do 20 hours of work in a 24-hour day. And I learned how to get a dissertation written, a 400-page dissertation written in a 24-hour day. Anybody here retired from the Virginia Department of Education? My dissertation was a 400-page history of the Virginia Department of Education during 1990 to 1994. You might want to read it sometime, Charlotte. It would take the whole year, but you know. But anyway, I think Ann Williams was part of that at VCU as well. But anyway, when I finally got to finish that, I was able to change careers and go into state government. So during that time in state government, I ended up in the Office of Consumer Affairs, Office of the Attorney General, where my background became consumer law and consumer protection. And my entire focus was consumers. Anytime a bill came across the governor's desk, it came down to us. I spent a great deal of time as consumer affairs specialist identifying which groups a bill would impact. And I spent a great deal of time contacting those consumer groups and writing impact statements and lining up people for the governor's office for whom this bill might impact. And I learned a great deal about legislative issues and impact. It was a wonderful, exhilarating experience for me. By the time I had retired, I had spent maybe 10 years in the General Assembly, and as consumer affairs specialist, I had probably done 500 stand and deliver speeches like this to various groups and organizations throughout Virginia, from classes in K through 12 to groups and organizations. And I'd been on national boards and so on and so forth. So you can see how tiresome it would be to sit through a list of all my accomplishments and so on and so forth. And that was long ago. So when I retired, I sat for 5 years in a dead silence. And I just was so totally bored. And when I got to Covenant Woods, of course, I immediately got involved in the Residence Council. So my advice to you is this is where it starts. Residence Council, internal governance issues, a proper residence handbook, making sure that your residence council representatives understand what laws govern your residence life. And I brought my handbook here with you. I know that when I met with your four folks earlier in, was it April? It seems like it was long ago, but I know it was just a short time ago, and we talked about, what was in our Residence Council handbook. For me, that was everything, to get involved, start educating our own people. So you do that here already in terms of providing information to your residents, and that's crucial. If you want to have resident representation on your boards of directors, you need to make sure your own residents are, and your resident council is informed about what kinds of laws and statutes, are the guidelines by which you have to abide by. So what else? I've got that handbook over here. So our program today is at your request. And the entire theme of resident representation on boards of directors has been a theme and a campaign of VACCRA for over 10 years. And this has been started by Joan Lewis, and some of you remember her. She was the state chair of the League of Women Voters. And she has pushed this from the beginning. We took this off the back burner and moved it forward, and we have had articles about this in our newsletter. We have had speakers about this in our newsletters. And we have had significant speakers about this in our newsletter. And I provided all of those materials to your organizing hosts here. We're going to continue with this, especially in our October annual membership meeting, where we will have the actual residents who have been selected to appear on their boards and act on behalf of residents on their boards of directors. So you can hear from actual people what their experience has been. But make no mistake about it, there's no going back on this. You folks are the main stakeholders and the majority stakeholders of the cash flow of these places. And you need to understand that you have the power here. And it's not a matter of threatening anybody, it's a matter of you're the majority stakeholders and you should have a say in long-term planning. And in order to have a say, you need to have a seat at the table. And the way to have a seat at the table is to make sure your bylaws allow that and to make sure you have a seat, one or two, in proportion to your population on the CCRC boards of directors. And we have two people here who have already had a seat on the board of directors who are able to tell you how that has happened for them. And Susan is here, who was past president of VACCRA for 4 years. And I asked her if she would do it again, and she said no. And I said, well, so don't tell me that. But she really held us together during a really awful time, during the pandemic. But she's part of a Pinnacle community, as are you. So she can tell you how that has happened for her. And then Chuck Webb, who is my tallest companion, is my successor on the Residence Council as secretary. And he really shepherded through our seat on the board of directors. From hell no, we're not going to do it in 2018 with our board, to, we already filled those positions, come back another day, to, yes, we have these 2 or 3 openings coming, and this is the process you go through. So the whole point of having VACCRA come to speak to communities like this is how we did it. And this is the process we used, and you're welcome to use any of this that you think may be helpful to you. So let me go ahead and introduce Susan now, and I think I'm within my 15 minutes of fame. And this is Susan Hindenleiter, who is Senior Vice President for VACCRA, and she will talk about Windsor Mead and the Pinnacle Living and how that interesting juncture works for them. Okay, Susan?
Good morning. I've only been here at Covenant at Cedarfield once before. Didn't make it into this room, but this is a beautiful, beautiful community and a valued member of VACCRA. Windsor Mead, beginning this year, has one person who is on the board. It's not as fancy. All of the work that was done to get him there was done during the pandemic, and unfortunately I wasn't a part of that. I can get the information for you, but I don't have it at my fingertips as to how it was done. I know that they had 3 possible candidates, and they provided the biographies and interviews to the board, and then the board chose one of those gentlemen as the member on the board. He's been to 1 or 2 meetings so far that I'm aware of, but he's barred from telling us anything about what happens at the board. Personally, I'm in hopes those kinds of things are going to change as both the community and the board begins to trust that process, that this isn't a spy, this isn't a firing squad. We simply need information that we have no other way of getting. As I said, this is a trial position for a 1-year term, and we're only half through it, so I can't tell you whether it's going to be continued or not. I'm in hopes that it will. is of value to us. I think it would be helpful if another Pinnacle Living community were on the board. So that's about everything I can say. Do you want to introduce? Okay, Chuck?
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Is that better? Yeah, okay, I can hear it. So I'm a retired physician and Peace Corps volunteer, and we had our Peace Corps group meeting last night, which was a lot of fun. I was also a Peace Corps doctor, took the kids back to experience living abroad. And I retired from Eastern Virginia Medical School. I was an internist at the Veterans Hospital there in Hampton, and they needed a geriatrician. So I got my boards in geriatrics, and then I went to the medical school and we started training geriatricians. So some of the physicians here at VCU were the people that we trained. So it's an honor to be here. I came here, we looked at Cedar Field and Westminster Canterbury, and a couple of places in Williamsburg. We were living in Newport News to be close to the medical school over in Norfolk. And, so as Penny said, I took over as secretary, and she's been my mentor in this. So I was the one that proposed things to the executive committee that then our chair of the committee went before, and we got approved, and then it went to the board. So let me see. Let's start here at the beginning. So I originally thought I'd be talking about Medicare, but I guess I learned a few days ago that we're only going to focus on directors, board of directors. The board of directors is now willing to consider residents for full board membership. So for many years we've had our chair of the Residents Council as an ad hoc board member, non-voting board member. Ad hoc means that because of his position as chair, he's allowed to attend the board meetings. But there are 15 votes, and he's the 16th person, so he's sort of the odd man out. But he goes to the finance meetings and the board meetings. Now we're going to have residents propose to be actual members on the board. They don't want to set up a special membership. They want us to go through the usual process and take one of the 15 positions as board members. It would be a 3-year commitment, and then most board members take an additional 3-year term. So we're talking about a 6-year term. No bylaws changes were necessary because there's nothing in the board's bylaws that says that a resident can't be a member of the board. So that was the advantage. As Penny mentioned a few years ago, we tried to get them to make the chair, who's the ad hoc member, a voting member, and that would require a change in the bylaws, and they turned that down. So right now, do you all know if your bylaws permit residents to be on the board? Okay, that would be an important issue.
They won't give us a copy of the bylaws.
Okay, well, you can propose to them, and then they'll tell you one way or the other. That's our first applications will be accepted in the second quarter of 2020, July, August, September. We start our year in April. The candidates will be eligible. There's an expectation there'll be at least 2 seats open, and there may be a 3rd seat. We're shooting for, over the course of the next few years, to get 3 members on the board, which would be 20% of the board membership. So the procedure for applying is interesting. It was very different than what I thought it would be. To become a board member, you make friends with a board member, and that board member proposes you. So there's no written application or anything. The board member who's going to propose you will talk to you about what you're getting into and make sure you're committed, get your resume, and then that resume will go to the governance committee, and they are responsible for deciding. The chair of the governance committee has come twice now to Residence Council to talk with us about this process and their willingness to work with us. We had a new CEO, and the new CEO was very instrumental in getting the board in sync with getting a resident on the board, and then up to the 20% or 3 residents on the board. He was a man from Massachusetts who was with the Kendall Corporation. Kendall has, I think, 22 CCRCs, and they were started by the Quakers. And the Quakers, you know, with their meetings of silence and their willingness to accept everybody as having a voice, were very much willing to put residents on the board. So when he came, he met with each of the board members and talked to them about the advantages of having residents on the board. So I think that was a big step. As it stands now, Resident Council will not be involved in the recruiting of people to come on the board. So if any resident wants to serve and contacts a board member, their name will go into the mix without Residence Council involvement. Mr. Bauer said that there were 4 standing committees, and what they do is they recruit essentially for these 4 committees. So, you know, there's an executive committee, so if you've been a person who's served on numbers of boards of directors, that would be attractive to them. There's a philanthropy committee, so if you're into nonprofits and raising money and being part of that. There's a finance committee, so if you're one who is good with numbers, and a governance committee. So he was speaking as being a real estate lawyer, and you know, so people interested in governance would. So when they recruit, they look at where their weaker committees are, and they try to recruit into that. So he said that if you're talking to a board member and trying to sell yourself to become a board member, that you want to figure out what it is that they're looking for and make sure that they know your background and your skills in that area. He said there's also a 5th, a strategic planning committee that's just gotten started. The CEO Tom Wright has said that we really need the strategic planning process. The Covenant Woods Board is a policy board, which means that they set the overall tone, and they hire the CEO, and they expect the CEO and the staff to run the facility. They're not into the day-to-day operations. So Mr. Bowers discussed conflict of interest. He said that for 25 years he's been the real estate lawyer handling Covenant Woods acquisition of land and questions about zoning and all of those things. So when he's on the board, if they're going to talk about anything related to real estate, he has a conflict of interest and he has to excuse himself. He also talked about confidentiality. What he said was, when the budget comes out, we're free to talk about the budget if you're on the board. However, there are aspects of getting to that budget which he described as making sausage and somebody's ox getting gored, and he said those kinds of things stay in the board and don't get shared with the general community. He listed roles and responsibilities of board membership. That was the one handout that they seem to have, and the thing that they go by. You're expected to attend all the meetings and functions, support the mission and policies and programs, review the agendas ahead of time, serve on committees, make a personal financial commitment to Covenant Woods, and then promote Covenant Woods to the greater community. So that's part of it. You're expected to suggest nominees for the board in the future, to be able to work with nonprofits, to follow all the conflict of interest and confidentiality policies, to refrain from making any special requests of the staff, and to assist the board in carrying out its fiduciary responsibilities, such as the annual financial statements, the budget, and other things. So the initial motion, I left some papers that Penny's going to give. The initial motion I proposed was a little bit off base. I said, let's ask them for a member for 2 years, and every other year we'll ask for a member, and then we'll have the chair as being the third member, and that would be 20%. And they took that idea and they said, no, we're going to stick with what our bylaws say, and if we're going to take residents on the board, they're going to fit the traditional pattern. So sometimes, you can blunder into things, which I think is what happened. I did, in presenting it to council, I put together the benefits of being on the board and a list, and that's it would be perceived as a positive gesture to give the residents a voice with a vote, a seat at the table. It would bring Covenant Woods into alignment with a lot of CCRCs that are growing and progressive, and there's an idea of shared governance, which, the old pattern used to be the autocratic, the management and control, and the residents and patients living as renters, and they make all the decisions. Shared governance is a much better concept where everybody has an input, and we really are the stakeholders. We bring our life savings and we put them into a facility like this. We pay a high monthly fee, and we expect that things are going to be managed well and managed appropriately. It would provide board members with valuable input from the residents. We've been doing these strategic plans, and we were at a table with a couple board members, and they said that they really enjoyed hearing what the residents said needed to be done to make the community better. It would add a degree of transparency and openness about the board so that there aren't rumors as they get started. There'd be a plus for marketing as people look at facilities to know that they have a say. That's what I had to say. So thank you.
When we started working on this, we took, and Jim Trent is here from Lakewood, people at VACCRA were just tripping all over themselves trying to write a coherent policy statement. And Jim Trent raised his hands and says, come on over to my place and let's see if we can get this coherent. And with his help at Lakewood, we wrote a 1.5-page policy statement. And this is something you should have because it's common sense. It says, this is VACCRA's policy statement on why we should have a resident on the boards of directors. Here's the complaints. Residents can't keep confidentiality. Second thing is, it's a conflict of interest. Third thing is, it's a conflict with residents. Fourth thing is, it just doesn't go with what we're doing before, and so on and so forth. So you should have this, number one. And number two, you really need what we call a champion. And as I was preparing for this, I was thinking, what did we have? You need somebody who eats words for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Look around you. Who in your community is on top of stuff? Who knows the history? Who is always got their fingers on the pulse of what's going on? I sort of think you know, and I know, you know. And I know Chuck is that person because I get emails or texts from him at 11:02 last night, among other things. Susan sleeps like a normal person. And, you know, and I know that too, but Chuck and I are, you know, related by birth, so I don't know how that happens, but, you know, and I know I can rely on him for stuff, but talk about serendipity in the universe. You need to start on your residence council, and you need to have a superb residence council handbook, and you need to put your residence association bylaws in here. You need to get a copy, maybe by Freedom of Information Act, of your board of trustees bylaws. I think Ellen Netting from the School of Social Work is on your board of directors. And Ann Williams worked at VCU at the same time I worked at VCU in strategic planning. Talk about a coincidence. And I took the pictures for Ellen Netting's 5th or 6th book rollout for Frank Baskin's School of Social Work, so I know her. And she's on the Pinnacle Board of Directors. Seems to me that that would make a nice conversation to have as, you know, you take over as chair of Residence Council and as an alum, faculty emeritus as well, Charlotte. I mean, that's how it happens. Covenant Woods had its 20th celebration of anniversary last October, and somebody was seated at my table, and over there, and I was over here, and somebody was in the middle, and this lady was starting to talk about something, and then my friend Barbara Furman, who Ann Williams knows, said, well, the person you should be talking to is right here, and lo and behold, it was a board of trustees person who talked to me for an hour on why we should have a member on the board of trustees. Lo and behold, I find myself in March on the Strategic Planning Committee. And of course, that wasn't by accident, but we already had a relationship. And as a VACCRA president at Covenant Woods, we have routine quarterly meetings with our new CEO, who is largely responsible for changing the atmosphere at Covenant Woods about shared governance. So one of these things, you know, that Jim and I worked through was, you know, who lives with us? 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds. And right now, the renewed interest in continuing care retirement communities and in VACCRA is due to the baby boomers that are now coming in and have been coming in for the past couple of years. And they're no fools. They're not going to put down $500,000 and expect to be told what to do. And you've got to realize that. You may be tired, you may be been there, done that, I'm not going to deal with this. I get tired of conflict. You have no idea what kind of stupid 8th grade games we have to play sometimes. Yeah, I see you laughing, I know you understand that. And that's why you let us do that for you. It's that simple. And when we get tired of it, our succession planning hopefully has somebody next in line who's going to take that over. You know, but the big things are put somebody on the board of directors who's going to represent your interests. You know, we're all sort of millionaires. Who knew? I never thought this would happen to me. So, anyway, this is important. Residents' rights. Nobody in our residence council knew 7 years ago that we had residence rights under Virginia law. I was shocked. What's the matter with you people? Don't you look outside your bubble? I didn't say it like that, but you know, now I'm totally unrestrained because I've made my first impression. You know how I am when I'm totally unrestrained. The other thing is the Guide to Continuing Care Residents Association, or the Guide to Regulation of Continuing Care. Let me see where it is. Here it is, number 4. This ought to be in your Residence Council handbook. The State Corporation Commission. We just fought a big legislative battle, which we lost, but we really won. We got change on the State Corporation Commission's website to make their website much more welcoming to the complaint page for people who live in CCRCs who have a complaint about financial transparency. Hint, if your board of directors will not give you your CCRC bylaws from your board, file a complaint. It's called financial transparency. And you are entitled by the rights and responsibilities under the Virginia Code to have certain documents. Huh? Well, yeah. Title 49 under the Bureau of Insurance. So, you got to educate people inside, and you got to educate your internal governance structure, and that is your residence council. You got to find a champion. Maybe not one, and if there's only one, find that one person and get behind them and wind them up and support them. Yes, my other name is Energizer Bunny. Thank you. Okay, Martha's looking at you with a hairy eyeball, so I better stop. We'll be able. She's used to me by now. Charlotte. Yes, the audience has questions, and Sally Wood is here with her traveling microphone. Please don't ask me if I'm taller than I used to be.
Can you hear me?
No.
No.
Turn it on. Charlotte did send me 8 questions a long time ago, and I did answer them. I have that text, so. Okay, Barbara.
I'd like to ask of Susan, who is a member of Windsor Meeting, part of Pinnacle.
Okay.
How was a board of directors handled so that a resident was placed on your board? Was Windsor Meeting approached? Or did Pinnacle Living approach Windsor Meeting?
I can't answer definitively because I was not a part of the process, but my suspicion is it came from Windsor Mead, from the residents.
Thank you. Sally Wood and all.
Sylvia has a question.
Oh, Sylvia, and I have a question too. Sylvia, fine.
Well, it's sort of following up on Barbara. I was frankly shocked to hear that Windsor Mead has a person on the board. Covenant Woods sounds like they have or are just about having a member on the board. Where Cedarfield has been blocked time and time again and will not be, the board won't even entertain a conversation with us about this possibility. I was very surprised.
When the residents of Covenant Woods formed their residents association, maybe 20 years ago, they were wise enough to write into their bylaws that the chair of the residence council shall have a non-voting seat. The non-voting part was not wise, but shall have a seat on the board of directors. That was a good thing. That's not changed since then. That could have been a negotiating place for that. The other part was, what was the other part of your question? You were surprised about that?
I was surprised that Pinnacle won't talk to us.
Won't talk to you. All right. When we planned this meeting for April 22nd and it had to be canceled because we got an outbreak of Charlotte sent me 8 questions, and I went through and uncensored myself in answering them. You do have a nuclear option, and I call this a nuclear option. You're the majority stakeholders. You are in an area with 8 competing CCRCs. You fight an applicant pool from for-profit CCRCs as well as not-for-profit CCRCs. That applicant pool is dwindling every single year. Anybody know anyone who's signed up for Avery Point? Erickson Community, last October was it, issued a decree that removed via fait accompli, a memo removing the resident representatives from their boards of directors. I was shocked. Nothing happened. They all were removed from the boards of directors. I have told everyone who's asked me, do not sign up to live at Avery Point. It is a non-democratic community. Why would you put your money into a place that would use your money willy-nilly on anything they want? So it's Avery Point, Ashby Ponds, and Green Spring. And Green Spring came to us with a set of complaints. In November, we went out there and did our first dog and pony show. And believe me, it was like being at a rock concert at Wembley Stadium in London. I mean, they had huge screens, and it was broadcast to the whole community, and a place like this was full of like 200 people. I went, oh my God, what am I gonna do? But, we made a compelling case, for folks, you need to join VACCRA. You let us speak for you. They're having a community meeting this June. And God bless you folks. It was no brainer for you to be a member. The community membership is $150. What is the problem here? So whatever it was, they didn't have a champion enough to push it through. The Betty Chrisman, who was their resident council chair, was just plain worn out. She took a cruise, a lengthy, maybe 90-day cruise. I wish I had, but just to rest up for time on residence council. So, we'll hear. I offered to pay the $150 for their community membership. How hard is that? But, they needed the blessing of the community. So, those three communities, Ashby Ponds, Avery Point, which isn't even built yet, and Green Spring, are part of the Erickson community. The Erickson community has, I think, 21 communities throughout the country. Please remember that they took, via a sweeping memo, all the residents off their boards of directors. You got to remember that. Add up what you paid for an entrance fee. Add up what you paid for a monthly fee. Add it up for a year. Do you want to be part of a community like that where you have no say in how they invest your money? You've got to keep that in mind. What else? Chuck wants to say something. I'll be quiet.
If your residence council passes a motion to the board of directors and says, we would like to consider a resident on the board, that forces them then to draft a reply.
They have to reply.
So they have to come back, and that starts a conversation. It sounds like right now you haven't had the beginning of a conversation, but if you can get them,
Speak up. Yeah.
if you can get them involved, by sending them a motion, the residents and the residents council representing all the residents association wants representation on the board, then they have to come back and say, they may come back and say no, and then they have to justify it, and then you start a conversation. But I believe that may be the first step.
And all of you at Cedarfield, I imagine, are movers and shakers from your previous worlds. You wouldn't deny it anyway. We had to put a model motion in our resident council member handbook of how to do a motion, how to do a resolution. Be it resolved that. And we sent it to the chairman, the CEO of Covenant Woods, to convey it to the board of directors. They took 6 months to reply. You got to know that when I met with the new CEO, I let him know how insulting that was to us in no uncertain terms. So, when I say I'm going to get in your face, you need somebody like that who's not going to play nice when the residents have been insulted. You have to understand how much financial power you have, getting back to the competition in the area and the nuclear option. The nuclear option, I forgot to tell you, is to call a meeting of the residents, prepare a petition, and say, this is what we want, and bring it to them. Now, prepare a timeline. What are you going to do first? Do a resolution. And there's a model in here. We'll provide a copy of how to do that. And then you got a new guy. Where's he from? Westminster Lake Ridge? He has a reputation. You can check him out. You know, is anybody on good speaking terms with him? I'm looking at Martha's. We all are? Okay, well, it's time to continue your speaking terms with him. Our VACCRA people meet quarterly. Yeah. Regularly. Keep that up. Do not put up walls. And I think one of the reasons we were successful at Covenant Woods is we started conversations with the new guy. Plus, I'm from Massachusetts, and I lived in the same hometown where the new guy came from. You know, so, you know, and I took Ellen Netting's pictures of her book rollout, you know, so that's a little bit of a leverage there. And, you know, you can look up the board of directors members, you know, do some research. Who's who do you know? You know, and go from there. And you never know what's going to happen, but you got to have a champion. It's the same thing for a strategic plan. You know, who in your community can do that? Question?
When you keep getting rebuffed constantly to include coming to the CFO not showing up for this meeting, you know, you can't sit there and say to somebody that you know who's looking at moving in here, say, don't come, because bottom line, that hurts us. You know, what power do we have as individuals to get them to have somebody on board? I mean, it's not like we can say, hey, we're not going to pay our rent.
That's a thought. Reputation. You know, what does the reputation of Cedarfield look like? The other day, my friend Barbara Furman, who Ann Williams knows, tuned into Westminster Canterbury, and she saw right away that they were bragging about being #1 CCRC in Richmond. And I said, oh, really? And she texted me again this morning, and she said, that's down, that's gone. I went, oh, interesting. So, you know, we watch those things, and our guy just hired a big consultant to come in and do a whole, you know, bunch of focus groups on Covenant Woods and everything else, and I'm part of the whole strategic plan focus groups on where she would go in the next 24 months, and I was part of VCU's strategic plan, and I worked for Barbara Furman, and Ann Williams was down the street doing her stuff on her end of the administration, and, you know, we all know how that's supposed to be, but you know, it's reputation. You guys got to survive. And do you have people lined up at your door to get in here? And could your opinion of your place affect the applicants? Not that you need to threaten, but the point is, if they want to use that leverage, you've got some leverage too. And if they want to stay outside the door of conversation, then that's something to be told to other folks. I don't know if Susan has any thought about that, or Chuck does, if you've seen that happen before. But we've sort of lived through that, but we got a new guy. So I would work with the new guy. And although he came to pay his respects, you know, I'm used to that. I just yawned in his face and said, bye. You know, he didn't even know it, but, you know, I'm just used to that. Fine. You should have stayed. But he can always listen. He left, yeah. And it may be that he didn't feel welcome. He didn't want to impose on, or his presence censor what I was going to say. And maybe that's the wiser path to take. Especially since you all have a continuing conversation with him, and I would push that. But sometimes when these meetings happen, those in authority think, well, it's going to happen, done. Nothing else is going to occur. No, grow it. Keep growing it. You know, I think I made copies of this for you folks, so we'll continue to do that, but you need to grow it from the inside out, up, and outward through your residence council.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? I do have one question and statement. one thing that's happened here at Cedarfield is in the last months, we've increased the membership so drastically.
Oh, yeah.
And it has been noticed by not just us, but by our executive director and by Pinnacle. And so it's vital as these memberships need to be renewed that we get those members to continue to be part of VACCRA. In the last 2 days, I have had 3 people give me money or tell me they wanted the application. So we've worked real hard to get to our own membership. We need, though, some advice about how to keep the members. I think having you here today helps. I definitely think that the VACCRA publications are great. And I think that this organization has gained a lot of respect at Cedarfield for being one of the organizations that really matters a great deal for our future and for our health and both financial and otherwise. So what else can we do to encourage?
Good, because I was reminded of what I'm supposed to say about that. Emails. I could look at my phone and I could tell you how many emails I have. However, I need to ask you to let us email you, okay? We're your voice, and we act on your behalf. We are politely knocking on your door. Just open the door and read what we're asking you to do. I know that those days are over for you, but they're not for us. Let us work on your behalf. All you have to do is read the email, and we have a system. We only send an email blast when we are asking for something. And since VACCRA is nonpartisan, what we're really looking at is following the price of rising prescription drug costs. We're looking at what citizens can do to help with the nursing home staffing problem. We had a superb speaker on where all the holes are in the social fabric and educational fabric in our last spring membership meeting. A superb speaker.
It's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube, and we'll resend that out. But you gotta open the email. I know you hate emails. But these new tools have helped us grow. And all you have to do is click on something. So, let us do that. Let us speak for you. That's what we're here for. And fine, I understand you're worn out. You don't have to fight those battles. We'll do it for you. Okay? And, so it's important to do that. What else was I going to say? Oh, yeah. 7 years ago, I did not realize that I would have a national footprint. I just thought that I was just one little person from a small town in Massachusetts. But I am the president of the Virginia Continuing Care Residents Association, one of only 11 state associations. I am now the secretary on the executive committee of the National Continuing Care Residents Association. So I am dedicated to straightening them out and getting them to do things right and being a voice for the other state associations. And here comes Charlotte. She's going to yank me with her cane. All right, time's up. So anyway, I'm working on all our behalfs and on the state associations as well. Okay, and we can answer questions at lunch and go from there. Bye. Thanks. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Did I do everything right?
Yeah,
I answer all your questions?
Right.
Okay.
Yes, you did. Thank you very much. It is 11 o'clock. Do you want to stay a few minutes? Do you have comments you want to tell us about? Do you have any other questions of Penny or Chuck or Susan?
Now you can email any of us.
Take advantage of them while they're here. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yes, in the back.
And I usually have paper and pen when I do, and I take extensive notes. But you rolled off a lot of things like the complaint form and a lot of things that you've done and that we ought to have. And
Is there a list, or did anyone else take notes of a list of those? I mean, you rolled off a lot.
Yeah, I did, didn't I?
You're giving us a
And I
copy.
want every one of them.
Yeah, I'll make a list of things we have done in the past 2 years that have changed from start to finish. Especially that complaint form on the State Corporation Commission website. How many of you are computer literate and you're not afraid of the computer? You know, that's another problem we have with our elderly population. They're afraid of their intuition. They don't quite know how to follow it with regard to computers. And, you know, they don't know how much work it saves them. So we'll do that.
Thanks.
And you can also email me. You know, I'm at the, yeah.
Okay, thank you all very much. We'll have a meeting in June. Thanks, Penny.
Thank you, Eddie.